And you'll see here in this mixture, I have some warmer colors here, some cooler colors in the shadow. Variety is key. We don't want to mix up a large puddle of one color and just use that color on the whole scene. So mixing up colors, letting them merge on the paper, that's exciting. That's what watercolor is all about. Today I'm going to show you how I take this complex scene and turn it into something that is paintable. So I'm going to show you step by step how I paint this street scene. We're going to talk about color mixing and values and timing, all those things along the way. Let's get started. I started out with my drawing, and I had to take a little bit of time with this drawing because you have the perspective of the scene, of the buildings, and you have to get the angles right. One choice that I made was there was a figure over here behind the truck. I moved him over in front of the truck to make him more prominent in the scene. So after my drawing is in place, I wet down the back and the front of my paper, and then we're ready to get started. The first wash is all about the light in the scene. I start up with the sky. I'm using some lavender and some raw sienna with just a little bit of cerulean and cobalt blue for the bluer areas of the sky. This day was pretty hazy. The sun did pop out for just a little bit, so there's not a lot of blue in the sky. I wanted it to kind of have that flat look that the photograph has. So as I work down to the horizon, I keep things nice and light, and now I lay in some tone for the ground, and that's raw sienna, lavender, a little bit of neutral tint. I want to start laying in some of the light value for the building. Now, when I say light value, I know that I'm going to go over this again. I'm going to paint over the scene with all the middle values and the darks, but there are going to be little bits I might want to leave behind as I paint that. So that's what this wash is about, laying in the colors that you want to leave behind within your next wash. Aside from that, I need to lay in the light area of the truck and the merchandise on the back of the truck, as well as the lights on the figure and the cars and the signs and things like that. So after I lay in this large wash, I'm going to go in and add a little bit more color in some of the areas. I added some raw umber over here, some cobalt blue in this area, and some raw umber and burnt sienna here. I'm looking at the reference and I'm just thinking, what is the light version of that color that I'm seeing? The light of the signs or any of that other detail. One thing I'm not really thinking about at this point are all these tiny little bits in the background. I want to just leave that nondescript. So in some of these areas, there is an awning that is more green colored. I'm dropping that in now. And for this, I'm using some cerulean for the blue of these crates on the back of the truck, taking away the white of the paper here. It was a little too stark against the other values, but I know that once I get the middle values in place around that area, that truck will feel nice and bright. Dropping in a little bit of skin tone on the figure and a little bit of light blue for his clothing, some tan color for this car, and I dropped in a little bit of yellow and some rose matte or permanent on this sign. Now I'm dropping a little bit more, when I see random colors in the window, it just gives me an idea. Drop that in now while things are wet. I might want to leave some of that when I paint the next wash and leave little areas behind. I like to give myself as many options as I can when it comes to that. Some of these things I might just cover up and you'll never see them. Other little bits I might paint around and it might add a nice little effect to that area. I'm using this clean, damp brush and lifting out a few directional lines while the road is still damp. I might end up covering this up, I'm not sure, or it might end up sticking around and being an interesting lead-in line in the foreground. Now I have all the light values in the scene. This is where I step back, let my painting dry, and then move into the next phase. So after things have dried, it's time to move into that middle value shape, and I want to zoom ahead and show you where we're going with that. That is what we're getting to. A large connected shape with a little bit of different colors mixing together in a larger wash, but looking for the connections. Especially in scenes like this, there's so much information in the scene, little details all the way in the background of the scene. That's why it's so important to squint at the scene and combine values and look at the big connected shape. Find that big unified shape. Don't get too involved in all the little marks that are all over the scene. So let's back this up. We're going to start over on this upper left building. I came up with this gray mixture of cobalt blue, rose madder permanent, and raw sienna, and just mixing that around until I get this lovely gray color. And I added a little bit of raw umber, some cobalt turquoise, trying to mix in some other colors where possible, linking this building into the back of the truck, using some cobalt blue for that middle value of blue on that truck, and I can kind of pull some of that in and tie it in to what's going on here. I brought the wash to the bottom here. I'm leaving the back of the truck in light. The rest of the truck I'm tying into the middle values. Now, I know that I'll need to come back and catch this before it dries and gives me a hard edge. So in this mixture, I'm using a good amount of paint and water. Things aren't just drying up instantly. This wash is going to stay wet for a little while, and that's good because it gives me time to make my decisions, switch up my colors, and more time to work without things drying. Then I bring that down to about street level, and you'll notice that I'm still trying to mix in a variety of colors, adding in some brown with the cooler colors, some of the green over the top of that other green that I laid in, tying the shape of the car right into the shape of the building. Again, when we look at the reference picture, we see those as two separate objects. When we paint it, we want to see the connection between those two and let those values merge into each other. Now that I have this nice wet edge here, I can connect that into the shadow shape, and I'm going to do that next. So I went ahead and connected my figure with some middle value with some blue over what I painted before. And now I'm connecting the shadow and the darker areas of the truck with the figure. And I liked this part of the shadow. There's some poles and just stuff all over the place that are casting interesting shadows on the ground. And I want to use my brush to just kind of abstract that shape. And here we have a nice value connection between what's going on in the buildings and what's going on in the car. Now remember, the darks and the details, those are going to come later. In this phase of the painting, I'm really looking at that middle value connection. I will add the darks in later when I come back in the next phase. So I left that little bit of light on top of the car. Now I'm coming back into this here, into the value on this building. There were these little round lamps, I believe, or round things on the building over here. I lifted some of those out in the first wash. I'm going to attempt to paint around them and include them here. And that's more possible when I'm methodically working my way across the scene. I'm not jumping around the painting, starting over here, moving over here, doing all that. I'm picking a path that I'm painting around the scene. So I've worked over to the building, into the shadow and truck, moved back off into the distance. Now I'm connecting this side of the painting with that. And it's easier to paint around these little highlights when I use that methodical approach. And you'll see here in this mixture, I have some warmer colors here, some cooler colors in the shadow. Variety is key. We don't want to mix up a large puddle of one color and just use that color on the whole scene. It'll make the scene really lifeless. So mixing up colors, letting them merge on the paper, that's exciting. That's what watercolor is all about, is letting those colors mix on the paper and letting watercolor behave like watercolor. I dropped in a little bit of rose madder permanent on that sign, scratched in a little bit here. I thought it'd be nice. We're gonna have a lot of lines, power lines and poles and things like that when we get into the darks. Now we are ready to move into the next phase. We're gonna add the darks into these buildings and really bring a feel of finish to this scene. So I'm starting over here, looking back at these buildings, realizing where the darks are. I'm painting these darks, and where I can, I'm trying to connect them into each other. So this building is coming down here and then tying back into this. When I get back into the distance, I've been talking about that a few times now since we've started, but I don't want to overwork the background of the painting. This is a street scene. It's a giant city with tons of things going on in the background. But what I'm trying to do is really squint, simplify, and know that when I get the darks into the middle ground, that will carry the painting. No one's going to look and say, well, that background building looks kind of, unfinished. That's what we want it to be. We want it to be just the background. What happens is when we get too many details all over the scene, the different parts are just competing with each other for your attention. Working my way around, getting in the little bits of darks and separation. I added some more value on this figure and some darks under the truck. And once again, I'm tying in the darks with some of the darks on the back of this crate. Once we start to get the darks involved, the painting really starts to come together. I have this pole, didn't incorporate in the earlier washes, so it's just going to be painted as a dark and dry brush. But it is a nice vertical, and I wanted to include a good vertical here. Now I'm adding some darks on this car, and it's always amazing to me when you work through the lights and the middle values, and then you finally come back and put in the darks. It really just brings things together. The light is starting to become evident in the scene. Things are starting to look like things and not just flat shapes. We're giving things more form when we get the darks in and have that full range of values. It's one of the most fun parts of the painting process, because when you're painting more abstractly and you're doing the drawing, you're still in this place of wondering if things are going to turn out. Well, once you get to the darks and you start putting those in the painting, you know if your painting is working. But it's a very enjoyable part of the painting process to dig in and finally be able to add in those darks and details into the scene. So I got this car how I want it to be. I got this car in the distance. Now I'm just adding some darks, breaking up areas, figuring out what areas need more information. And a little bit of advice on that: take a step back from your painting as you're working. You get so close up when we are working, and we can get consumed with what's going on in the distance, like I've been harping on. Take mental breaks when you need to, and step back from your scene. When I do this type of detail work for the background, I'm looking at the painting and I'm kind of squinting. I'm looking at the middle ground, seeing how this is working in the scene. We want to think of our painting as a whole. We don't want to get too obsessed with one part, because it's really about the whole painting, how the different parts relate to each other. That's why I keep talking about contrast and darks and edges, because where you have those is where the viewer is going to pay attention the most. Adding a few more windows and little bits on the building to break things up. These lines are good verticals. Verticals just kind of lead your eye around the scene, trying to just hint at some of the windows, keeping that perspective in line. Interesting part of this subject and taking pictures in Seoul, Korea, is just power lines everywhere. Power lines, they make nice lead-ins to the scene. And it's great to get that nice, crisp, hard edge over the softer wash of the sky. It brings that middle ground of the painting closer to us and lets that background sit further back. Here I'm using a Signwriter's brush. It's like a cheap brush I found online. I like that. It's like a pinstriping brush, what you would use on a car, but it can hold a lot of pigment and you can be very accurate with it. But I like loading it up, getting those sweeping lines with this brush. If you don't have one of those, a rigger brush can work just fine. So working through those wires, getting those other vertical pulls into the scene, more wires, more little things. A variety of brush marks is important too. I don't want to use the same brush mark just all over the scene. Turning your brush, using a variety of brushes, brings a feeling of freshness to your work. And I put the little shadow of the wire here too. That was a nice lead in. Plus it leads us right into this area of interest that I thought was useful. Putting a few more darks over here, finishing up the little signs and details and things like that. I put a couple little brake lights on the back of the truck, messed around with that figure some more, put a little bit of lettering on the sign. And the last thing I did, you'll notice I do this in a lot of my scenes. I'll do the first initial wash for the road, and then when I'm finishing my painting, something I find helpful, do a thin little wash over this and leave little bits behind in the foreground and middle ground, and then just leave it really smooth in the background. Like I've mentioned a few times, texture brings an area forward, lack of texture pushes it back. So by skipping over the paper here, leaving some of that first wash behind, I'm creating texture right here in our main area of interest. And then as it moves further back, I don't have that texture. It just kind of fades off into nothing. So that is another tool, another good little move to bring interest into this area. It lets us know that this area is closer up to us and that area is further away. So there you have it. That is a look at the finished painting. I hope that this is helpful for you to see how I take on a scene like this and how we can start to simplify and turn something in that looks so chaotic and crazy and make it something that is paintable, that can read well, that has a clear idea of the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. Next week, I'm going to show you step by step how I paint this desert scene. I got to teach in Arizona a while back, so I'm going to walk you through this scene step by step. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Hit that bell notification. I come out with a new video every single Monday. And if you're looking for a free resource that can help you out in your painting today, take a look at this. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone. You could print it out. You can download this right now before you start your next painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.